The November wind rattled Sarah Mitchell's apartment windows as she stirred the pot of tomato soup on her stove. It was 7:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, she remembered, because she just checked her phone, smiling at a text from her mother asking about Thanksgiving plans. At 28 years old, Sarah had finally found her rhythm in life. Her third-grade classroom at Riverside Elementary was her sanctuary, filled with colorful posters, the laughter of children, and the sweet smell of markers and construction paper. Her students adored her, calling her Miss Sarah with genuine affection. She hummed along to the playlist streaming from her laptop, completely unaware that her life was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The first sign something was wrong came as a whisper of displaced air, a presence she felt rather than heard. Sarah turned from the stove, her wooden spoon still in hand, and her heart stopped. A figure stood in her living room doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black ski mask that reduced his features to dark, hollow spaces. Her apartment was on the third floor. The fire escape. She'd meant to report the broken latch to her landlord for weeks. "Don't scream." His voice was low, almost casual, which somehow made it more terrifying. But Sarah did scream. She screamed with every ounce of air in her lungs, the wooden spoon clattering to the floor as she backed against the counter. The man moved with frightening speed, crossing the small kitchen in 2 strides. His gloved hand clamped over her mouth, cutting off her cries. The smell of cigarettes and stale beer overwhelmed her senses as he dragged her backward into the living room. "I said don't scream," he hissed against her ear. Something cold and metallic pressed against her ribs, a knife. "Do you feel that? One sound and I'll make sure it's your last." Time became meaningless. Minutes stretched into hours as Sarah's nightmare unfolded in her own home, the place that should have been her safest refuge. The intruder ransacked her apartment methodically, forcing her to sit on the couch while he filled a backpack with her laptop, jewelry, the small emergency cash she kept in her desk drawer. But it wasn't just robbery. He seemed to enjoy her terror, making comments that made her skin crawl, moving close to her face just to watch her flinch. "Please," Sarah whispered when he paused near her grandmother's antique music box, the one heirloom she truly treasured. "Please don't take that." His laugh was cruel. He picked it up, wound the key, and let the tinkling melody fill the apartment before smashing it against the wall. Sarah's silent tears became sobs. The 3 hours that followed would become a blur in Sarah's memory, her mind's desperate attempt to protect itself from the full weight of the trauma. She would later recall moments in fragments, the knife at her throat, his threats whispered in grotesque detail, the certainty that she wouldn't survive until morning. He kept her on that couch, paralyzed by fear, while he ate food from her refrigerator and drank her wine, treating her home like his personal playground of terror. It was Mrs. Chen from apartment 3B who finally called 911. The elderly woman had been returning from her evening walk when she heard what sounded like furniture crashing, followed by a woman's muffled crying. The dispatcher kept her on the line as patrol cars converged on the building, their sirens wailing through the quiet neighborhood. The intruder heard them first. His head snapped toward the window, and Sarah saw genuine panic flash across what little of his face was visible. "Don't move, don't say a word," he snarled, pressing the knife harder against her side. She felt it pierce her shirt, the sharp sting telling her it had broken skin. Then he was running, knocking over her lamp as he bolted toward the fire escape. Sarah heard his boots clanging on the metal stairs, fading into the night. When the police burst through her apartment door moments later, weapons drawn and voices shouting commands, they found Sarah Mitchell huddled in the corner behind her couch. She'd wedged herself into the smallest space possible, arms wrapped around her knees, rocking back and forth. Her brown eyes were wide and unseeing, her body trembling so violently that Officer Torres, the first to reach her, initially worried she was having a seizure. Miss, you're safe now. He's gone, you're safe." Torres holstered her weapon and knelt slowly, keeping her movements gentle and predictable. "Can you tell me your name?" Sarah's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She stared at Torres as if she were speaking a foreign language. Shock had stolen her voice. Detective James Romano arrived 20 minutes later, his 15 years of experience having taught him that the first hours after an attack were crucial. He found Sarah sitting on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, while paramedics checked her vitals. She still hadn't spoken. Her eyes tracked the officers moving through her apartment, photographing evidence, dusting for fingerprints, but she seemed disconnected from the scene, as if watching it happen to someone else. "Miss Mitchell," Romano said softly, sitting in the chair across from her. "I'm Detective Romano. I know you've been through something terrible tonight, but I promise you we're going to catch whoever did this. I won't stop until he's behind bars." Sarah's gaze finally focused on him. Her lips moved, forming words that barely qualified as a whisper. "He's still out there." "Not for long," Romano assured her, though he'd seen enough cases to know that promises made in the aftermath of trauma were sometimes impossible to keep. Sarah was taken to Hennepin County Medical Center, treated for minor physical injuries and severe psychological trauma. Her mother drove through the night from Duluth, arriving at dawn to find her daughter sedated and staring at the ceiling. The vibrant, passionate teacher who'd called her just hours earlier to discuss pie recipes was gone, replaced by a hollow shell that wore Sarah's face. The doctors diagnosed severe acute stress disorder, warning it would likely develop into post-traumatic stress disorder if left untreated. They prescribed medications, recommended therapists, and spoke in calm, clinical terms about recovery timelines. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't listening anymore. She'd already begun building the walls that would imprison her for the next 2 years, brick by brick, shutting out a world that had proven itself capable of unimaginable cruelty. She couldn't have known then that those walls would one day be dismantled by the most unlikely of heroes, a 4-year-old golden retriever named Cain, and 2 simple words that would change everything. 23 months after that November night, Sarah Mitchell stood at her apartment window, watching the world move without her. Below, children played in the park across the street, their laughter floating up like mockery. She'd once been one of them, not a child, but someone who belonged to the world of light and normalcy. Now she was something else entirely, a ghost haunting her own life. The apartment had changed. Her mother, Linda, had moved in within a week of the attack, transforming the guest room into her permanent residence. Together, they'd repainted the walls, replaced the furniture, even changed the layout completely. But no amount of renovation could erase what had happened. Sarah still saw him in every shadow, still smelled cigarettes in every breeze from the open window, still felt the knife against her ribs when she closed her eyes. "Sweetie, Dr. Wells is on the phone," Linda called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that careful, gentle tone Sarah had come to hate. It was the voice everyone used now, like she was made of glass, like one wrong word would shatter her completely. Sarah didn't turn from the window. "Tell her I can't talk." "Sarah, you've canceled 3 appointments this month." "Then make it 4. Linda appeared beside her, the phone still in her hand, her face creased with worry lines that hadn't existed 2 years ago. At 56, she'd planned to be enjoying early retirement, traveling with Sarah's father before his heart attack 5 years prior. Instead, she was a full-time caretaker to a daughter who could barely function. "Dr. Wells says the new medication might help with the nightmares." Linda tried again. "The last medication made me sleep 18 hours a day. The one before that made me vomit every morning. The one before that," Sarah's voice cracked. "I don't want more pills, Mom. I want my life back." But her life was gone. Riverside Elementary had been incredibly understanding at first, granting her leave of absence, sending cards and flowers. Her classroom was now taught by Mrs. Peterson, a retired teacher who'd come back to fill in. The children had moved on, as children do. Sarah was just a memory to them now, a teacher who'd mysteriously disappeared. She couldn't leave the apartment without her mother. Couldn't go to the grocery store, couldn't check the mail, couldn't do any of the mundane tasks that comprised a normal life. The panic attacks came without warning. Her heart would race, Her vision would tunnel, and she'd be back in that November night, trapped on her couch while a monster rummaged through her belongings and whispered threats. Dr. Patricia Wells, her therapist, had tried everything: cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, EMDR, alphabet soup treatments that promised healing but delivered only marginal improvement. The diagnosis was official now: severe post-traumatic stress disorder with acute anxiety and agoraphobic tendencies. The papers made it sound clinical, manageable. The reality was that Sarah Mitchell, who'd once hiked the Superior National Forest and traveled solo to Chicago for teacher conferences, now couldn't walk down 3 flights of stairs without hyperventilating. Detective Romano called again yesterday, Linda mentioned quietly. He said he has an update. Sarah finally turned from the window. Let me guess, another dead end. Her mother's silence was answer enough. Across the city, Detective James Romano sat at his desk in the Minneapolis Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division, surrounded by file folders that represented his greatest failure. Sarah Mitchell's case had become his obsession, the one that kept him up at night, the face that haunted him when he looked at his own daughter. 23 months, 700 days. He'd followed every lead, interviewed every person who'd been within a mile of Sarah's building that night. The intruder had been careful: gloves, mask, generic clothing. The only physical evidence was a single cigarette butt found on the fire escape landing, DNA extracted but no match in any database. Without a suspect, the DNA was useless. Romano's partner, Detective Lisa Hernandez, set a fresh coffee on his desk. You're doing it again. Doing what? Staring at that file like it's going to spontaneously solve itself. She sat on the edge of his desk. Jimmy, you've done everything possible. Sometimes the bad guys just get away. Not this one. Romano opened the file for the 1000th time, studying the crime scene photos. He's out there, Lisa, probably hurting someone else, and Sarah Mitchell is locked in her apartment, too terrified to live because I can't find him. It's not your fault. It's my case, my responsibility. Hernandez sighed. She'd known Romano for 12 years, had worked dozens of cases with him, and she'd never seen him this personally invested. The DNA is in the system. If he gets arrested anywhere in the country, we'll know. If Romano closed the file, the weight of that single word crushing. That's a hell of a thing to hang hope on. But hope, as it turned out, was a stubborn thing. On a rainy Tuesday in October, almost 2 years to the day since Sarah's attack, Romano's desk phone rang. He almost didn't answer, buried as he was in paperwork for an unrelated robbery case. Detective Romano, Criminal Investigation. Detective, this is Sergeant Mike Peters from St. Paul PD. I think we might have a hit on one of your DNA samples. Romano's heart stopped. Say that again. CODIS flagged a match to a case you entered 23 months ago. Victim Sarah Mitchell, home invasion and aggravated assault. We just booked a guy named Marcus Devine for attempted burglary over here. His DNA came back as a match to evidence from your scene. Romano was already grabbing his jacket, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get his arms through the sleeves. Don't let him go anywhere. I'm on my way. Already in holding. We'll keep him comfortable for you. The drive to St. Paul usually took 30 minutes. Romano made it in 18, his unmarked car weaving through traffic with practiced precision. Marcus Devine. The name repeated in his head like a prayer. Finally, after 700 days of dead ends and disappointment, they had him. The St. Paul station was a maze of corridors, but Romano had been there enough times to navigate blindly. Sergeant Peters met him outside the holding cells, a thick file under his arm. Marcus Devine, 34 years old, Peters briefed him. Prior arrests for burglary, assault, robbery. Did 6 years at Stillwater, released 18 months before your victim's attack. We picked him up breaking into a warehouse on the east side. He had a laptop and some jewelry on him. We're running them against stolen property reports now." Through the observation window, Romano saw him for the first time. Marcus Devine sat slouched in the metal chair, looking bored rather than concerned. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. His booking photo would show cold, dead eyes that Romano would never forget. "He say anything?" Romano asked. "Lawyer immediately." Peters handed him the file. "But the DNA doesn't lie, detective. You got him." Romano's phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed Sarah's number. Linda answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Detective Romano. Is Sarah available?" She's having a difficult day, detective. Maybe tomorrow." "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to speak with her. It's important. It's good news." A long pause, muffled conversation. Then Sarah's voice, thin and fragile, "Hello." Romano's throat tightened. "Sarah, we got him. We found the man who attacked you. His name is Marcus Devine, and he's in custody right now." The silence stretched so long Romano thought the call had dropped. Then he heard it, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, the sound of 2 years of fear and anguish cracking open. "You're sure?" she whispered. "The DNA is a perfect match. It's him, Sarah. He can't hurt you anymore." But even as Romano said the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. Marcus Devine had already hurt Sarah in ways that couldn't be undone by an arrest. The real battle, getting Sarah Mitchell from victim to survivor, was only just beginning. And it would require more courage than anyone knew she possessed. The media descended on Marcus Devine's arrest like vultures. His mugshot appeared on every news channel across Minnesota, cold, dark eyes staring out from TV screens with an expression that chilled viewers to their cores. "Alleged home invasion suspect arrested after 2-year investigation," the headlines screamed. Sarah couldn't escape his face. It was on her mother's iPad, on the television in her therapist's waiting room, even on her neighbor's newspaper left outside their door. "Turn it off," Sarah begged as Linda watched the evening news 3 days after the arrest. "Please, Mom, just turn it off." But Linda was transfixed by Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim's press conference. "The people of Minnesota can rest assured that Marcus Devine will face justice for his heinous crimes. We have substantial physical evidence and intend to pursue the maximum sentence allowed by law." Sarah fled to her bedroom and didn't emerge for 16 hours. The trial was set for January 14th, 73 days away. Rachel Kim made the trip to Sarah's apartment on a gray November afternoon, her briefcase heavy with case files and legal precedents. She was a formidable prosecutor with a conviction rate that made defense attorneys nervous, but as she sat across from Sarah in the small living room, her expression was gentle. "I won't lie to you, Sarah. This is going to be difficult," Rachel began, her voice steady but kind. "We have excellent physical evidence, DNA, fingerprints on items stolen from your apartment, witness statements. But the jury needs to understand the full impact of what Devine did to you. They need to hear it from you." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "I can't." "You can, I've seen you." "No," Sarah's voice rose, sharp with panic. "You don't understand. I can't be in the same room with him. I can't look at him. I can't breathe when I think about it." Linda squeezed her daughter's shoulder. What if Sarah wrote a victim impact statement? Could that be enough? Rachel's expression was sympathetic but firm. Minnesota law allows for victim impact statements, but they're typically given after conviction during sentencing. During the trial itself, we need Sarah's testimony about what happened that night, the details that only she can provide. Without it, she hesitated. Without it, the defense will paint Devine as a simple burglar who got spooked. They'll minimize the psychological torture, the terrorizing. The jury won't feel the full weight of his crimes. "There has to be another way," Sarah whispered. But they all knew there wasn't. January 14th arrived with brutal Minnesota cold, the kind that turned your breath to ice crystals and made your bones ache. The Hennepin County Courthouse stood imposing against the gray sky, its columns and stone facade representing Justice Sarah no longer believed in. Her victim advocate, Linda Chen, a woman who'd guided hundreds of victims through the trial process, met Sarah and her mother in the parking garage. "We'll take it one step at a time," Linda Chen said, her calm voice a stark contrast to the chaos in Sarah's mind. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for." They made it to the courthouse doors. Sarah's legs stopped working. "I can't." She gripped her mother's arm, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Mom, I can't, he's in there." "We can wait," Linda Chen soothed. "The prosecution doesn't need you until this afternoon. Let's just try to get inside, okay? Just inside the building." It took 20 minutes of gentle coaxing before Sarah crossed the threshold. The courthouse interior was all marble and echoing voices, lawyers in expensive suits conferring in corners, families waiting on wooden benches. Sarah made it 15 feet before her vision tunneled and her knees buckled. Her mother and Linda Chen caught her before she hit the floor. "I've got you, baby. I've got you," her mother whispered. But Sarah was already gone, lost in a flashback so vivid she could smell the cigarette smoke, feel the knife against her ribs. Day one of trial proceeded without her. Rachel Kim presented the physical evidence, walked the jury through the crime scene photos, established the timeline of events. Marcus Devine sat at the defense table looking bored, occasionally whispering to his attorney, Robert Blackwell, a silver-haired defense lawyer known for his aggressive tactics and theatrical courtroom presence. "Your Honor," Blackwell said during his opening statement, his voice dripping with practiced sympathy, "what happened to Miss Mitchell was undoubtedly frightening. A stranger in her home, her possessions stolen, traumatic, certainly. But my client maintains his innocence, and we will show that the prosecution's case is built on circumstantial evidence and forensic procedures with known error rates." He was already planting seeds of doubt, and Sarah wasn't even there to counter his narrative. Day two, Sarah made it further. Through the doors, past security, up the elevator to the third floor. Linda Chen held her hand as they walked down the corridor toward Courtroom 5C through the small window in the courtroom doors. Sarah could see the back of Marcus Devine's head. She vomited in the hallway trash can, her entire body shaking. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, I'm trying, I really am." "Nobody's judging you," Linda Chen assured her, rubbing circles on her back. "Trauma isn't logical. Your body is trying to protect you." But Sarah felt like a failure. After everything Devine had taken from her, her sense of safety, her career, her independence, he was now taking this too. Her chance to face him, her chance to tell the world what he'd done. Rachel Kim found them in the hallway during the lunch recess, her expression troubled but not angry. "The judge is willing to be flexible with timing. We can delay your testimony, but Sarah..." She knelt beside the bench where Sarah sat, looking her directly in the eyes. "The defense is painting Devine as a desperate man who made a bad choice, not a predator who terrorized you for 3 hours. Every day you're not on that stand, his version of events becomes more plausible to the jury." "What if I still can't do it?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "Then we do our best with what we have. But I won't lie, without your testimony, this becomes a much harder case to win." Day 3 was Sarah's breaking point. Dr. Wells had prescribed emergency anti-anxiety medication, and Sarah took double the recommended dose just to get out of bed. Her mother drove her to the courthouse. Linda Chen met them at the entrance, and together they formed a protective barrier around her as they navigated the building. This time, Sarah made it to the courtroom doors. She put her hand on the handle. Through the window, she could see the jury box, the witness stand, the place where she'd have to sit with Marcus Devine's eyes boring into her. Her hand wouldn't turn the handle. "Just open it," she whispered to herself. "Just open the door." But her body refused. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run, to hide, to get as far from this place as possible. Her vision swam. The corridor tilted. And then she was running, past Linda Chen's startled expression, past her mother's reaching hands, down the stairs because she couldn't wait for the elevator, out into the January cold where she collapsed on the courthouse steps and wept. Inside Courtroom 5C, Rachel Kim stood before Judge Patricia Ellsworth, a woman known for her fairness and her no-nonsense approach to justice. Your Honor, I need to request a brief continuance. Our key witness is suffering from severe PTSD and is currently unable to testify. Blackwell was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is prejudicial to my client. How long does the prosecution expect my client to sit here while they try to convince a reluctant witness to participate? Justice delayed is justice denied. Judge Ellsworth removed her glasses, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Blackwell, I understand your concern, but I also understand that victims of violent crime often struggle with the trial process. Ms. Kim, how much time do you need? Rachel thought of Sarah sobbing on the courthouse steps and her heart sank. How much time would it take to heal 2 years of trauma? 48 hours, Your Honor. I have some alternative arrangements I'd like to explore. 48 hours granted. Court is adjourned until Monday morning. The gavel fell, echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. Rachel gathered her files, her mind already working. She'd heard about programs using facility dogs to support traumatized witnesses, but Minneapolis PD didn't have one. Or did they? She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Officer Michelle Torres from the Victim Services Unit. The call was answered on the second ring. Torres. Michelle, it's Rachel Kim. I need to ask you something that might sound crazy, but I'm desperate. Do you still have that therapy dog you brought to the domestic violence awareness event last year? There was a pause. Kane. He's not just a therapy dog, Rachel. He's a fully certified facility dog trained for courtroom support. Why? Rachel looked out the window at Sarah Mitchell, still crumpled on the courthouse steps, and allowed herself a small smile. Because I think I just found our answer. Officer Michelle Torres had been with the Minneapolis Police Department for 11 years, but her most important partner had only been with her for 4. Kane wasn't your typical police dog. He didn't sniff out drugs or chase down suspects. His work was quieter, more intimate, and in many ways more challenging. He helped broken people find the courage to speak. The 4-year-old golden retriever lay on his bed in Torres' office at the Victim Services Unit, his honey-colored fur gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. His brown eyes tracked Torres as she paced, phone pressed to her ear, listening to Rachel Kim explain Sarah Mitchell's situation. She can't even enter the courtroom, Rachel, Torres said, watching Kane's ears perk up at the tension in her voice. You're talking about a victim with severe, untreated PTSD. Even with Kane's support, there's no guarantee she'll be able to testify. I know it's a long shot, Rachel admitted, but I'm out of options. Without her testimony, Divine walks away with a slap on the wrist. And then what? He hurts someone else and we could have stopped him. Torres stopped packing. She'd heard that argument before, had felt that weight herself. Let me talk to Sarah first. I won't promise Kane's services unless I'm confident it won't cause more harm than good. Fair enough. Can you come to her apartment tomorrow morning? Torres glanced at Kane, who'd stood up, sensing her decision before she made it. We'll be there at 9. Kane's journey to becoming a facility dog had begun in a specialized breeding program in California. Canine Companions for Independence had carefully selected his parents for their temperament, calm, intelligent, eager to please but not hyper. From 8 weeks old, Kane had been raised by a volunteer puppy raiser who'd exposed him to every possible environment: crowded malls, noisy restaurants, hospitals, schools. By the time he entered professional training at 18 months, nothing rattled him. The training was rigorous. Kane learned over 50 commands, from basic obedience to specialized tasks. He could provide deep pressure therapy by leaning his full 70 pounds against someone having a panic attack. He could create a physical barrier between a victim and their attacker during testimony. He could sense when someone was beginning to dissociate and intervene before they completely shut down. Most importantly, he'd learned to remain calm in emotionally charged environments where humans were screaming, crying, or frozen with fear. Torres had requested Kane specifically for courtroom work after watching a facility dog help a child testify against their abuser in a case that had haunted her for months. The certification process had taken another 6 months, background checks, evaluations, practice sessions in actual courtrooms. Kane had to prove he could lie perfectly still for hours, ignore distractions, and never react to sudden movements or loud noises. He'd passed every test flawlessly. Over the past 2 years, Kane had assisted 17 witnesses through their testimony. Domestic violence survivors who'd been beaten by partners they'd loved, children who'd witnessed murders, sexual assault victims who'd been told by defense attorneys that they were liars. Kane had been there for all of them, offering silent support that transcended words. But Torres knew Sarah Mitchell's case would be different. More difficult. The woman couldn't even enter the courtroom. How could Kane help if she never got close enough for him to work his magic? Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Torres loaded Kane into her SUV, his service vest already in place, a blue jacket with facility dog "Do Not Pet" emblazoned across the sides. Kane loved his vest. The moment it went on, his entire demeanor shifted from playful companion to focused professional. They drove through Minneapolis's residential neighborhoods until Torres found Sarah's building. It was an older complex, with fire escapes zigzagging down the brick exterior. Torres spotted the third-floor landing where Marcus Devine had entered that November night, and her jaw tightened. Linda Mitchell answered the door, her face lined with exhaustion and worry. "Officer Torres, please come in." The apartment was small but cozy, decorated in soft neutrals with family photos on every surface. Sarah sat curled in an armchair by the window, wearing oversized sweatpants and a university hoodie, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked younger than her 30 years, more fragile, like a strong wind might blow her away. Her eyes widened when she saw Kane. "Sarah, this is Officer Torres and Kane," Linda Mitchell said gently. "They're here to talk to you about the trial." Torres held Kane's leash loosely, allowing him to assess the situation. The dog's training kicked in immediately. He sensed Sarah's fear and anxiety, read the tension in her posture, noted the way she'd pressed herself into the corner of the chair as if trying to disappear. "Hi, Sarah," Torres said, keeping her voice soft and non-threatening. "I know having strangers in your home probably isn't comfortable. Would it be okay if I sat down?" Sarah nodded mutely. Torres settled on the couch, positioning herself at an angle so she wasn't directly facing Sarah, a technique to reduce feelings of confrontation. Kane sat beside her, his attention fixed on Sarah with that intense, understanding gaze that seemed to see straight into people's souls. "Rachel Kim told me about your situation," Torres began. "I want you to know right away, I'm not here to pressure you into testifying. That's your choice, and no one can make it for you. I'm just here to offer you an option you might not know existed." "The dog," Sarah whispered, her eyes never leaving Kane. "His name is Kane, and yes, he's what we call a facility dog, specifically trained to support people during difficult legal proceedings. He's worked with 17 other witnesses, helping them get through their testimony when they thought it was impossible." "How?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "How does a dog help with that?" Torres smiled. "It's hard to explain until you experience it. Kane doesn't judge, doesn't have expectations, doesn't need you to be strong or brave. He just is. He's steady when everything else feels chaotic. He's warm when the world feels cold. And somehow having him next to you makes the impossible feel just a little bit possible." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "I can't even walk into the courtroom. I've tried 3 times. I want to God, I want to so badly, but my body won't let me." "That's PTSD," Torres said. "Your brain is trying to protect you from a threat it perceives as real and present. It's not weakness, Sarah. It's a normal response to abnormal trauma." "Can I?" Sarah's hand moved slightly, reaching toward Kane. "Can I pet him?" Torres had been waiting for this question. "Actually, I'd like to try something different if you're comfortable. Kane works best when he's allowed to approach on his own terms. Would it be okay if I let him off leash? He'll come to you if he senses you need him." Sarah nodded, and Torres unclipped the leash. For a moment, Kane didn't move. He sat there, his intelligent eyes studying Sarah with an intensity that was almost unsettling. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood and walked across the room. He didn't rush, didn't bound excitedly the way dogs usually do. Each step was measured, purposeful, as if he understood the gravity of this moment. When he reached Sarah's chair, Kane lowered his head and gently rested his chin on her knee. The effect was instantaneous. Sarah's breath hitched and her hand, shaking but determined, reached down to touch his soft fur. The moment her fingers made contact, something broke inside her. Tears streamed down her face as she stroked Kane's head, and the dog pressed closer, offering his warmth and weight. "He's so soft," Sarah sobbed. "He's so gentle." Torres felt her own throat tighten. This was why she did this work. These moments when connection happened, when healing began in the smallest, quietest ways. They sat like that for 10 minutes, Sarah crying silently while Kane remained perfectly still, absorbing her pain with the patience of a creature who understood suffering without needing words to explain it. Finally, Sarah looked up at Torres, her face blotchy but her eyes clearer than they'd been since the officer arrived. "If Kane is with me, do you really think I could do it? Could I testify?" Torres chose her words carefully. "I think Kane gives you the best possible chance. But Sarah, I need you to understand, this will still be the hardest thing you've ever done. Kane doesn't make the fear go away. He just helps you be brave enough to face it." Sarah's hand continued stroking Kane's fur, drawing strength from his solid presence. "When is the trial?" "Monday morning. Rachel Kim can file a motion for Kane to accompany you to the witness stand, but the defense will object. The judge will have to rule on whether it's allowed. And if the judge says no, then we're back where we started." Sarah closed her eyes, tears still leaking from the corners. Kane shifted, pressing more of his weight against her leg, and Sarah's breathing deepened, steadied. When she opened her eyes again, there was something new in them. Not confidence, not courage yet, but the tiniest spark of possibility. "Tell Rachel to file the motion," Sarah said, her voice stronger than Torres had heard all morning. "I'll try with Kane. I'll try." Monday morning arrived with the kind of Minnesota cold that made your lungs burn. Sarah Mitchell hadn't slept. She'd lain in bed all night, staring at the ceiling, her mind alternating between determination and terror. At 4:00 a.m., she'd finally given up on sleep and taken a long, scalding shower, trying to wash away the anxiety that clung to her skin like a second layer. Her mother had laid out clothes the night before, a simple navy blue dress, professional but not formal, the kind of outfit that wouldn't draw attention. Sarah's hands shook so badly she couldn't fasten the buttons. Linda had to help her, tears streaming silently down both their faces. "You don't have to do this," Linda whispered for the 100th time. "Baby, if it's too much." "I have to." Sarah's voice was hoarse. "He took everything from me, Mom. I can't let him take this too." Officer Torres and Kane arrived at 7:30. The golden retriever was in his blue service vest, his tail wagging gently when he saw Sarah. The moment she opened the door, Kane walked straight to her, pressing his nose against her hand. Sarah dropped to her knees and buried her face in his fur. "I'm so scared," she whispered into his neck. "I'm so scared." Kane didn't answer, he couldn't, but somehow his steady breathing, the warmth of his body, the absolute calm radiating from him was answer enough. He was saying, I know, I'm here. We'll do this together. The drive to the courthouse was silent except for the sound of Sarah's ragged breathing. She sat in the back seat with Kane's head in her lap, her fingers twisted in his fur like a lifeline. Tors watched them in the rearview mirror, hoping desperately that she'd made the right call. If this went wrong, if Sarah had a complete breakdown on the witness stand, it could traumatize her even further. The courthouse parking garage was nearly empty this early. Rachel Kim waited by the entrance, her expression tense but hopeful. With her was Linda Chen, who'd coordinated every detail of this moment. The judge ruled in our favor, Rachel said immediately. Kane can accompany you to the stand, but Sarah, she took Sarah's cold hands in her own. Robert Blackwell, the defense attorney, is going to try everything to rattle you. He'll question your memory, your motivations, your mental state. You need to be prepared for that. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she was prepared for anything. They took a private elevator to avoid the crowded main entrance. Tors kept Kane close to Sarah's side, the dog's presence already working its magic. Sarah's breathing was rapid but controlled. She wasn't running. Not yet. The corridor outside Courtroom 5C was buzzing with activity. Reporters lined the walls. They'd been barred from photographing Sarah directly, but their hungry eyes tracked her anyway. She heard whispers. That's her. The victim. Look at the dog. Sarah's vision started to tunnel. The walls pressed in. Kane sensed it immediately and stopped walking, forcing everyone to pause. He looked up at Sarah with those bottomless brown eyes, and Tors gave quiet direction. Deep pressure, Kane. The dog rose on his hind legs, placing his front paws on Sarah's chest, his weight grounding her to reality. Sarah wrapped her arms around him and time stopped. The reporters, the whispers, the courthouse, all of it faded. There was only Kane, only this moment, only the next breath. I can do this, Sarah whispered. I can do this. Tors lowered Kane back down. Yes, you can. The courtroom doors loomed ahead like the gates to hell itself. Through the small window, Sarah could see people filing in, the jury, the court reporter, the bailiff. And at the defense table, his back to her, sat Marcus Devine. Her feet stopped moving. Sarah, Linda Chen's voice seemed to come from very far away. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Sweat trickled down her spine despite the building's chill. This was it, the moment she'd have to face the monster who destroyed her life. Then Kane did something he'd never done in all his training. Without any command, he walked ahead of Sarah and sat directly in front of her, blocking her view of the courtroom door. He looked back at her, and in that gaze was something profound. I'll go first. I'll lead the way. You just follow me. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. Okay, she breathed. Okay, Kane, I'll follow you. Tors opened the courtroom doors. The silence was immediate and absolute. Every head turned. The jury, 12 strangers who would decide Marcus Devine's fate, stared openly. The gallery, packed with reporters and observers, went completely still. Even Judge Patricia Ellsworth looked up from her papers, her expression softening at the sight of the young woman entering with a golden retriever at her side. And at the defense table, Marcus Devine slowly turned around. Sarah's entire body went rigid the moment their eyes met. Those same cold, dead eyes from her nightmares. The same cruel smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. For a moment, she was back in her apartment, back on that couch, back in that endless November night. But then Kane pressed against her leg, hard and insistent. His warmth bled through her dress, anchoring her to the present. Tor's hand touched her shoulder gently. Her mother was behind her, somewhere in the gallery. Rachel Kim stood at the prosecutor's table, giving her an encouraging nod. You are not alone, all of them were saying. Not this time. Sarah lifted her chin and walked down the center aisle. Each step felt like moving through concrete, but she took them anyway, one foot in front of the other. Kane matched her pace perfectly, his body creating a barrier between her and Devine's stare. The walk to the witness stand couldn't have been more than 30 feet, but it felt like miles. Sarah's legs trembled. Her vision swam, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Because if she stopped, if she ran, Marcus Devine won again. When she reached the witness stand, the bailiff, a burly man named Officer Peterson who'd seen countless witnesses over 30 years, looked at her with undisguised admiration. "You've got this," he mouthed silently. Sarah climbed the 3 steps to the witness box, and Kane followed, settling at her feet in the small space. His body pressed against her calves, a constant reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. Torres sat in the front row of the gallery, ready to intervene if needed. Judge Ellsworth leaned forward, her voice gentle but clear. "Miss Mitchell, before we begin, I want to thank you for your courage in being here today. Please know that you are safe in this courtroom. Do you understand?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." "Please raise your right hand." The bailiff stepped forward with a Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" Sarah's hand shook so violently it was visible from the back row, but she kept it raised. "I do." "Please state your name for the record." This was it, the moment everything changed. Sarah's mouth opened, but at first, no sound emerged. Her throat had closed up, her body's final attempt to protect her from this trauma. She looked down at Kane, and the dog looked up at her with such absolute trust and confidence that something loosened in her chest. Sarah Mitchell." Her voice was thin and reedy, but it was there. She'd spoken, she'd said her name. Rachel Kim approached the witness stand, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Her expression was compassionate but professional. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. I know this is difficult, so we're going to take this slowly, okay?" Sarah nodded, her hand dropping to rest on Kane's head. The feel of his soft fur between her fingers was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Can you tell the jury what you do for a living?" A simple question, an easy one. Sarah took a shaky breath. I'm a 3rd-grade teacher at Riverside Elementary." "And how long have you been teaching?" 6 years. "Do you like your job?" "I love it." Sarah's voice grew slightly stronger, talking about something that didn't hurt. They're wonderful, curious, and funny and honest. Every day with them was." Her voice trailed off because she'd used past tense. Every day was wonderful, before Marcus Devine took that from her too. Rachel let the moment breathe, allowing the jury to absorb the implication. Then she continued, her questions building slowly, methodically, toward the night that changed everything. "Miss Mitchell, I need to take you back to November 12th, 2 years ago. Can you tell us what you were doing that evening?" And just like that, the room faded away. Sarah was no longer in the courtroom. She was back in her apartment, stirring soup on the stove, humming along to music, completely unaware that her life was about to end. Her breathing quickened. Kane shifted at her feet, pressing harder against her legs. "I was making dinner," Sarah began, and her voice cracked on the last word. "It was just a normal Tuesday. I was making tomato soup. I just texted my mom about Thanksgiving." The tears started, but Sarah didn't stop. Because Kane was there, and her mother was there, and Rachel was there, and she was so tired of being silent. It was time to tell the truth. Sarah's words came slowly at first, each sentence pulled from a deep well of pain she tried desperately to seal shut. Rachel Kim guided her through the timeline, the soup on the stove, the music playing, the text to her mother. The jury leaned forward, hanging on every word. Even the court reporter, a woman who transcribed thousands of testimonies, found her fingers hesitating on the keys. And then what happened? Rachel's voice was gentle but persistent. "I felt something, a presence." Sarah's hand gripped Kane's fur tighter. "I turned around and he was standing there, in my living room, wearing a black mask." Across the courtroom, Marcus Devine slouched in his chair, his expression bored, but Sarah could feel his eyes boring into her. Her breath caught. "Take your time," Judge Ellsworth said quietly. Kane shifted, pressing more of his weight against Sarah's legs. The warmth, the solidness of him helped her continue. I screamed, I dropped the spoon, and I screamed as loud as I could. Sarah's voice grew stronger with the memory. But he was so fast. He crossed the kitchen in seconds and put his hand over my mouth, and I felt something cold against my ribs, a knife. Several jurors exchanged glances. One woman in the back row had tears in her eyes. "What did the intruder say to you?" Rachel asked. Sarah's jaw trembled. "Don't scream," he said. "One sound and I'll make sure it's your last." She paused, her breathing becoming more labored. He smelled like cigarettes and beer, and I knew I was going to die. "But you didn't die, Sarah. You survived. Can you tell us what happened next?" This was the hard part. The part Sarah had avoided discussing even with Dr. Wells, even with her mother. The 3 hours of hell that she'd locked away in the darkest corner of her mind. He dragged me to the couch, made me sit there while he went through my apartment. Sarah's voice had taken on a flat, detached quality, a sign Torres recognized as the beginning of dissociation. He took my laptop, my grandmother's jewelry, the cash from my desk, but he wasn't in a hurry. He seemed to enjoy it. "Enjoy it," Rachel prompted gently. He ate my food, drank my wine, played my music. The tears were flowing freely now, dropping onto Kane's fur, and he kept coming back to where I was sitting, leaning close to my face, saying things. "What kind of things?" Sarah's whole body began to shake. Terrible things, about what he could do to me, about how no one would hear me scream, about how easy it would be to. Her voice cut off abruptly. The courtroom held its collective breath. "Miss Mitchell," Rachel took a step closer, "can you continue?" But Sarah couldn't. She was slipping away, her eyes losing focus, her mind retreating to that safe, empty place where the memories couldn't reach her. Her hands went limp in Kane's fur. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. Torres stood in the gallery, ready to intervene, but she held back. Kane knew his job. "He put the knife to my throat," Sarah whispered, her voice now barely audible, distant, as if coming from underwater. "I felt it break the skin. I felt the blood running down my neck, and I thought, this is it. This is how I die, alone, terrified, in my own home." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Ellsworth's hand gripped her gavel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Even Divine's smirk had faded slightly, replaced by something that might have been discomfort. Rachel Kim knew she was losing Sarah. The young woman's gaze had gone completely blank, staring at something only she could see. Her body was in the courtroom, but her mind had traveled back to that November night. "Sarah," Rachel said softly, "can you hear me?" No response. Sarah's chest rose and fell rapidly, hyperventilating. A panic attack was coming, or worse, a complete dissociative episode that could traumatize her further. In the gallery, Sarah's mother stood up, her face stricken. "Sarah, baby." "Mrs. Mitchell, please remain seated," Judge Ellsworth said, though her own voice was thick with emotion. Robert Blackwell, the defense attorney, sat perfectly still. For once in his career, he had nothing to say. Even he, who'd built his reputation on aggressive cross-examinations, understood that intervening now would destroy any credibility he had with the jury. Sarah's breathing became more erratic. Her eyes were glassy, unseeing. She was back in her apartment, back on that couch, reliving every second of her nightmare. The courtroom dissolved around her. The faces blurred. The only thing real was the terror, the knife, the certainty of death. And then Kane moved. Without any command from Torres, without any visible cue, the golden retriever stood up. His training had prepared him for this exact moment, the moment when his human needed him most. He rose on his powerful hind legs, balancing carefully in the small space of the witness box, and placed his front paws gently on Sarah's lap. The weight of him, 70 pounds of solid, warm reality, landed on her legs. His face was suddenly level with hers, those deep brown eyes locking onto her unfocused gaze. Kane didn't break eye contact. He didn't move. He simply held her there in that moment, refusing to let her drift away completely. The courtroom froze. Every person present understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, something profound. This wasn't just a dog doing a trick. This was a trained professional performing the most important task of his life, bringing a shattered woman back from the abyss. Sarah's blank stare slowly began to focus. She saw Kane's face inches from her own, felt his warmth, his weight, his absolute presence. Her hands, which had been limp at her sides, rose trembling to touch him. "Kane," she breathed, his name barely a whisper. The dog made a soft sound, not quite a whine, more like an acknowledgement. "I'm here. You're safe. Come back." Sarah's fingers found his fur, soft and thick beneath her palms. She gripped it tightly, desperately, as if he were a life raft in a storm-tossed sea. Her breathing began to slow, matching the steady rhythm of Kane's own breath. The courtroom came back into focus. The judge's concerned face, the jury's tear-stained cheeks, her mother standing in the gallery with her hand over her mouth. And Marcus Devine, no longer smirking, watching with an expression that might have been something close to fear. Because in that moment, with Kane's paws on her lap and his eyes holding hers, Sarah Mitchell was no longer a victim frozen by her trauma. She was a survivor, anchored by the purest form of love and loyalty, finding her way back to herself. Torres exhaled slowly, relief flooding through her. It was working. Kane was doing exactly what he'd been trained to do. Rachel Kim stood motionless, not wanting to break the spell. Judge Ellsworth had tears on her cheeks that she didn't bother to wipe away. The bailiff turned his head, composing himself. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands frozen above the keys. Sarah wrapped her arms around Kane's neck, pulling him close. She buried her face in the soft fur at his shoulder, and her body shook with sobs, not the panicked, desperate sobs of dissociation, but the deep, cleansing sobs of someone who'd been holding everything inside for far too long. The golden retriever didn't move. He stayed perfectly balanced, his front paws steady on her lap, allowing her to hold him as long as she needed. His tail didn't wag. His attention never wavered. This was his purpose, the reason he'd been bred and raised and trained for 4 years. This moment, this woman, this chance to help heal what trauma had broken. The courtroom remained silent, bearing witness to something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Some moments transcend words, transcend law and testimony and evidence. They speak to something deeper, to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of connection, to the extraordinary capacity for healing when we open ourselves to receive it. And in that charged, sacred silence, as Sarah Mitchell held onto Kane like he was the only real thing in the world, everyone present understood that they were watching someone gather the pieces of herself back together. The pieces Marcus Devine had scattered across 2 years of nightmares and panic attacks and paralyzing fear. Kane had become her bridge back to the world of the living, and Sarah, with her face buried in his fur and her arms wrapped around his solid, steady presence, finally felt safe enough to cross it. Judge Ellsworth cleared her throat quietly. "Let's take a 10-minute recess," she announced, her voice rough with emotion. "Court is adjourned." The gavel fell softly, and for once, no one rushed to leave. They all remained seated, silent witnesses to a moment of grace that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with the human capacity for courage in the face of unbearable pain. The 10-minute recess felt like an eternity compressed into seconds. Sarah remained in the witness box, her face still buried in Kane's fur, her body racked with sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. Officer Torres approached quietly, offering water and tissues, but didn't interrupt the moment. Some things needed to run their course. In the gallery, Sarah's mother wept openly, held upright by Linda Chen. The jurors filed back slowly, their faces still showing the raw emotion of what they'd witnessed. Several had used the break to compose themselves, but their eyes remained red-rimmed. Juror number 7, a middle-aged mother of 3, clutched a tissue in her fist. Marcus Devine returned to his seat, flanked by his attorney. For the first time since the trial began, his arrogant demeanor had cracked. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with the witness stand. Robert Blackwell whispered something urgently in his ear, but Devine just shook his head, staring at the table. Judge Ellsworth returned to her bench, having removed her makeup in the bathroom and reapplied it to hide the evidence of her tears. In 32 years on the bench, she'd presided over hundreds of trials, murders, assaults, unspeakable crimes against children. But something about Sarah Mitchell and the golden retriever had pierced through her judicial armor in a way nothing else had. "All rise," the bailiff announced, though his voice lacked its usual authority. Everyone stood as the judge took her seat, and then settled back down. All eyes turned to the witness stand, where Sarah still held Cain, drawing strength from him like he was her only tether to reality. Rachel Kim approached slowly, giving Sarah time to collect herself. "Your Honor, may I have a moment with the witness?" "Take all the time you need, Ms. Kim." Rachel knelt beside the witness box, speaking quietly so only Sarah could hear. "You don't have to continue if you can't. We can stop right now. No one would blame you." Sarah's head lifted from Cain's fur. Her face was blotchy and wet, her eyes swollen, but there was something different in her expression now. Something that hadn't been there before. Not quite strength, not yet, but a kind of desperate determination. "I need to finish," she whispered hoarsely. "If I don't finish now, I never will." Rachel nodded, understanding. She stood and addressed the judge. "The witness is ready to continue, Your Honor." Sarah's arms slowly loosened from around Cain's neck. The dog remained perfectly still, his paws on her lap, maintaining the connection until Sarah was ready to release him. When she finally let go, Cain carefully lowered himself back to the floor, settling at her feet but keeping one paw resting on top of her shoe, still touching, still grounding her. Sarah looked down at him, at this beautiful creature who'd pulled her back from the edge of complete breakdown. Her throat tightened with gratitude so profound it hurt. Cain's brown eyes gazed up at her with such pure understanding, such uncomplicated love, that something inside her chest cracked open. This dog didn't know her history, didn't know she'd been a bright, happy teacher before that November night, didn't know she'd spent 2 years barely able to leave her apartment, didn't know she'd tried 3 times to walk into this courtroom and failed. He only knew that she was hurting and he had helped. That was enough for him. It was everything to him. And in that moment, Sarah Mitchell, who hadn't felt truly safe in 2 years, who'd forgotten what it meant to trust, who'd believed she was broken beyond repair, remembered something essential about herself. She remembered that despite everything Marcus Devine had done to her, despite every nightmare and panic attack and moment of paralyzing fear, she was still capable of feeling gratitude, still capable of recognizing goodness, still capable of love. The courtroom remained absolutely silent, waiting. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, dust motes dancing in the golden light. Somewhere outside, traffic hummed. Life continued, indifferent to the drama unfolding in Courtroom 5C. Sarah's hand reached down, her fingers trembling, and stroked Cain's soft head. The dog's tail gave a slight wag, not excited, just acknowledging her touch. She continued petting him, drawing courage from the simple act of showing affection to a creature who'd shown her such profound compassion. And then, in the dead silence of that packed courtroom, with every eye upon her and every breath held in anticipation, Sarah Mitchell spoke 2 words. They weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. They were soft and tender, filled with a depth of emotion that words alone couldn't convey. "Good boy." Those 2 simple words hung in the air like a prayer. Good boy. Words people said to dogs 1,000 times a day without thinking. Words that should have been ordinary, unremarkable. But in this context, in this moment, from this broken woman who just survived reliving her worst nightmare, those 2 words carried the weight of the entire universe. They said, "Thank you for bringing me back." They said, "Thank you for reminding me I can still feel safe." They said, "Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." They said, "Thank you for proving that goodness still exists in a world that showed me such cruelty." Juror number 7 began to cry, openly, unabashedly. She covered her mouth with her hand, but her shoulders shook with sobs. Within seconds, 3 other jurors had tears streaming down their faces. Juror number 3, a retired military veteran who prided himself on emotional control, turned his head away and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. In the gallery, Sarah's mother collapsed against Linda Chen's shoulder, overcome. Several reporters in the back row, people who'd covered murders and terrorist attacks and natural disasters, found themselves reaching for tissues, their professional detachment shattered. The bailiff, Officer Peterson, who'd stood guard in courtrooms for 30 years and thought he'd seen everything, turned completely around to face the wall. His broad shoulders trembled as he fought to maintain composure. Even the court reporter, whose job demanded absolute neutrality, had stopped typing. Her fingers hovered above the keys, frozen, as tears dripped onto the machine. She transcribed those 2 words, "Good boy," but no transcript could capture what they truly meant. Judge Ellsworth didn't bother hiding her tears this time. They flowed freely down her cheeks as she watched Sarah Mitchell stroke Kane's head with such tenderness, such pure gratitude. The judge had dedicated her life to justice, to the law, to ensuring that right prevailed over wrong. But this moment transcended law. This was about something more fundamental, the resilience of the human spirit, the power of compassion, the extraordinary capacity for healing. At the defense table, Robert Blackwell sat motionless, his expensive pen forgotten in his hand. He'd planned aggressive cross-examination questions designed to undermine Sarah's credibility, to suggest her memory was unreliable, to paint her as an unreliable witness. Every single question now felt obscene, impossible. How could he attack someone who'd just shown such profound vulnerability and courage? And Marcus Devine, the man who'd terrorized Sarah Mitchell for 3 hours, who'd held a knife to her throat, who'd stolen not just her possessions but her sense of safety in the world, sat perfectly still. His smirk was gone completely. His face had paled. For the first time, he seemed to understand that he wasn't looking at a victim. He was looking at a survivor, and that survivor, with those 2 simple words to a dog, had just demonstrated more humanity than he possessed in his entire being. The silence stretched on. No one moved. No one spoke. The moment had become sacred, untouchable. This wasn't about trial procedure anymore, or evidence, or reasonable doubt. This was about bearing witness to a human being reclaiming her voice, her power, her life, one gentle word at a time. Sarah continued stroking Kane's head, unaware of the collective emotional devastation she'd caused throughout the courtroom. To her, this was just a private moment between her and the dog who'd saved her. She had no idea that those 2 words, "Good boy," had instantly become the most powerful testimony of the entire trial. They had shown the jury everything they needed to know, not about the evidence or the DNA or the timeline of events, about Sarah herself, about what she'd lost and what she was fighting to reclaim, about her capacity for gratitude and tenderness even after experiencing such trauma, about her essential humanity that Marcus Devine had tried so hard to destroy but had ultimately failed to break. Finally, Judge Ellsworth cleared her throat. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "We'll take an early recess for the day. Court will resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. She paused, looking directly at Sarah. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for your extraordinary courage today." The gavel fell softly, and this time it sounded less like the bang of authority and more like a benediction. The next morning, Sarah Mitchell walked into courtroom 5C with Kane at her side, and something had fundamentally shifted. She didn't run. She didn't freeze. When Marcus Devine turned to look at her, she met his gaze directly for 3 seconds before looking away, not out of fear, but because he simply wasn't worth her attention anymore. Rachel Kim resumed her questioning, and Sarah's voice, while still trembling at times, carried a new clarity. She finished describing that November night, every horrifying detail. She explained how she'd heard her neighbors calling police, how Divine had fled down the fire escape, how she'd hidden behind the couch until officers found her. She described the 2 years that followed, the nightmares, the panic attacks, the career she'd lost, the life that had been stolen. "Do you see the person who attacked you in this courtroom today?" Rachel asked. Sarah's hand dropped to Kane's head. The dog pressed against her leg, steady as always. "Yes, he's sitting right there." She pointed directly at Marcus Divine. "Let the record show the witness has identified the defendant," Judge Ellsworth stated. When Rachel finished, she yielded to Robert Blackwell for cross-examination. The defense attorney stood slowly, having spent all night reconsidering his strategy. He approached the witness stand carefully, speaking in a softer tone than anyone had ever heard from him. "Miss Mitchell, I only have a few questions," he began. "You testified that you couldn't see your attacker's face clearly because he wore a mask, correct?" "Yes." "So how can you be certain my client is the man who attacked you?" Sarah's jaw tightened, because I'll never forget his voice, his build, the way he moved, the smell of his cigarettes. She paused, her eyes boring into Divine. "And because his DNA was all over my apartment, because he still had my grandmother's necklace when police arrested him, because I know." Blackwell nodded slowly. He had no follow-up questions. To push harder would only make the jury hate him, and by extension his client even more. "No further questions, Your Honor." The rest of the prosecution's case proceeded swiftly. Detective Romano testified about the investigation, the DNA evidence, the items recovered from Divine's possession. Forensic experts explained the overwhelming scientific proof. The case was airtight. The defense offered little. Divine didn't testify. Blackwell knew putting him on the stand would be disastrous. They called a DNA expert who quibbled about contamination possibilities, but even he admitted the evidence was extremely strong. After 2 days of testimony, both sides rested. The jury deliberated for 1 hour and 47 minutes. When they filed back in, Sarah sat in the gallery with her mother and Kane at her feet. Officer Torres sat beside them, her hand resting on Sarah's shoulder. The forewoman, juror number 7 who'd wept during Sarah's testimony, stood. In the case of the state of Minnesota versus Marcus Divine, on the charge of aggravated burglary, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of felonious assault? Guilty. On the charge of terroristic threats? Guilty. All counts, guilty on every single one. Sarah's mother sobbed with relief. Sarah herself sat perfectly still, tears streaming silently down her face. Kane's head rested on her lap, ever present. Marcus Divine's face drained of color. For the first time since his arrest, fear showed plainly in his eyes. He'd been so certain he'd walk away with a minimal sentence. But the jury had seen Sarah. They'd seen Kane. They'd witnessed those 2 words that changed everything. Judge Ellsworth scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later. The courtroom was equally packed for sentencing. Sarah stood to deliver her victim impact statement, Kane once again at her side. Her voice didn't shake this time. "Marcus Divine, you took 2 years of my life. You made me afraid of my own shadow, afraid to leave my apartment, afraid to live. You destroyed my career, my independence, my sense of safety in the world." She paused. "But you didn't destroy me. I'm still here. And with the help of an extraordinary dog named Kane and people who refused to give up on me, I'm reclaiming everything you tried to take." Judge Ellsworth sentenced Divine to 22 years in state prison. He'd be nearly 60 when released. As the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, Divine looked back at Sarah one last time. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, hand on Kane's head, watching her nightmare disappear through the courtroom doors. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell stood in her third-grade classroom at Riverside Elementary, a golden retriever puppy sitting beside her desk. She'd named him Justice, a 4-month-old ball of energy who was beginning his training as her personal service dog. "Miss Sarah, can we pet Justice?" a student asked. "After reading time," Sarah said, truly smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. Her recovery wasn't linear. She still had nightmares sometimes, still had moments of panic, but they were becoming less frequent, less intense. Dr. Wells was amazed by her progress. Her mother had finally moved back to Duluth, confident her daughter could manage independently. Officer Torres called one afternoon with a proposition. "Sarah, I'm speaking at a conference about facility dogs in courtrooms. Would you consider joining me? Your story. It could help change laws, help other victims." Sarah didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely yes. Together, they traveled across Minnesota, sharing Sarah's story. They spoke to judges, prosecutors, victim advocates, legislators. Sarah's testimony, and particularly those 2 words to Cain, had captured national attention. News outlets had covered the trial extensively. The image of Sarah and Cain became a symbol of resilience and the power of animal-assisted therapy. Within a year, Minnesota passed the Facility Dog Access Act, making it significantly easier for trauma victims to have certified service dogs accompany them during testimony. The law became a model for other states. Sarah received letters from victims across the country, thanking her for paving the way. 3 years after that November night, Sarah stood at a conference in Chicago, Justice, now a fully trained service dog, at her side. She addressed an auditorium full of victim advocates and told her story once more. "Marcus Devine tried to take everything from me," she said, her voice strong and clear. "But he couldn't take my capacity for healing. He couldn't take my ability to trust again, and he definitely couldn't take my future." She reached down to stroke Justice's head. "A golden retriever named Cain taught me that even in our darkest moments, we're not alone, that simple acts of compassion can save lives." That 2 words, just 2 simple words of gratitude and love, can carry more power than all the violence and cruelty in the world. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Sarah stood there, tears in her eyes, one hand on Justice, thinking of Cain and that moment in the courtroom when everything changed. "Good boy," she whispered to Justice, and this time the words carried no pain, only hope, gratitude, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The end.